A millionaire made a random stop at a roadside diner and was stunned to come face to face with his wife and son, who had been missing for 10 years. What he uncovered afterward left him shaken to the core. "Would you like more cream, sir?" the boy asked quietly, but clearly. His hand set the coffee cup down on the table, so gently it barely made a sound. Elliot looked up. The boy met his eyes, not for more than a second, but it cut deep like a blade, slicing through memory. Elliot froze. The coffee cup tilted in his hand, spilling over the back of it, though he didn't even notice. The boy's gaze was lowered again, his hand placing the tray on the table in a calm, practiced motion. Nothing out of the ordinary, except one thing. That look. There was no mistaking it. Dark amber eyes, with slightly drooping upper lids, the pupils round and deep. Elliot had seen those eyes every morning, kneeling by the bed to tie the shoes of a 3-year-old boy. His son. 30 minutes earlier, Elliot Granter, 45-year-old businessman and chairman of a major media corporation, had no intention of stopping in a place like this. His SUV had jolted suddenly while going over a small ridge in rural Montana. Nothing serious, but he stopped anyway, cautious, as always. A dim light illuminated an old wooden sign. Silver Spoon, Family Restaurant, open all night. His hand hesitated for a moment on the door handle, then he pushed it open. The air inside was warm, still. There was the smell of stew and apple pie. A soft country tune was playing from a small radio behind the counter. Only 2 other customers were there, an elderly couple at the back, quietly eating without speaking or looking at each other. The yellow glow from the overhead lights cast a hush over everything. Elliot sat at a table by the window, took off his gloves, and ordered a black coffee and meatloaf. He wasn't hungry, but needed something to keep his body going. And then the boy appeared. About 16 years old, slim build, messy brown hair, wearing a dark blue apron. He brought the coffee over without looking the customer in the eye. But the moment his hand set the cup down on the table, their eyes met. Right then, it wasn't suspicion. It was instinct. Elliot knew. He didn't understand how or why it was possible, but he knew. Something deep inside him insisted on the impossible. This was Lucas. The boy lowered his head slightly, then turned away as if nothing had happened. His steps slowed by half a beat as he walked away, though he too had felt something. But he didn't look back. A faint noise came from the kitchen. Elliot turned. A woman stepped out from behind the plastic curtain, hair pulled back, shoulders slumped from fatigue. She held a dish towel in her thin hands, each movement deliberate and slow. He looked closer. His chest tightened. His eyes didn't leave her face. Older now, thinner, worn, but it was a face he couldn't forget. She looked up just as the overhead light angled across her dark hair, and their eyes met. Time stopped. Her eyes widened. Her fingers clenched the towel. Her mouth opened as if to speak his name, then closed again. She turned and disappeared behind the kitchen curtain. Elliot shot to his feet. His chair clattered to the floor behind him. No one else in the diner reacted, except the boy, now standing near the register. He glanced at Elliot, then quickly looked away. Elliot strode toward the counter. A young woman was wiping it down, probably another employee, not much older than the boy. "Where's the woman who was just here?" he asked, voice low but clear. She looked up, frowning. "You mean the one from the kitchen?" She was tired, went to lie down. "What's her name?" "I'm not sure. Lena, maybe? Or Lena. They don't really talk much." Elliot stood there a few seconds silent. Then he set some money on the counter and walked out. Cold air slapped his face as he pushed through the door. He stood outside, not heading to his car just yet. He looked back at the diner, its yellow light glowing dimly through the frosted glass. 10 years. A divorce he had once believed was real, a disappearance he had forced himself to accept. But now, the old broken pieces were starting to roll back together. If that was Lena, if that was Lucas, who had lied, and why? The wind carried the scent of apple pie from the kitchen vent, but he no longer felt it. Elliot walked toward his car, his hand gripping the door handle, heart in turmoil as if it was he, not the vehicle, that had just come off the rails. Elliot returned to the diner at 7 in the morning. The sky was still grey like the night before, but a light snow had fallen, covering the wooden roof with a thin layer. Inside, the place was quiet, nearly empty. The country music was still playing, but today it sounded like it was coming from far away. The boy was no longer there, nor was the woman with the eyes that had kept him awake all night. There was only a new staff member, a man, well past middle age, wiping down the counter. Probably the owner. Elliot ordered a coffee and sat in the same seat as before, asking no questions. When the drink was brought to him, he spoke just one sentence. "Where's the family working the kitchen yesterday?" The man shrugged. The mother and son didn't leave a word, just disappeared. We were a little surprised, honestly, but truth be told, they always kept to themselves. My guess, they didn't want to be found. Elliot didn't press further. He stayed a few more minutes, staring through the fogged-up window at the snow-covered road, then got up and left. His steps were slow, but his mind had already begun to race. Back at the hotel, he shut the door to his room, took off his coat, and lit the small fireplace. His hand opened the laptop, pulling up the work email inbox, but his eyes drifted to the old leather bag resting on the nearby chair. Inside that bag were things he hadn't touched in a very long time. He unzipped it, pulled out a worn folder, the edges frayed slightly, titled Lena Grant, Divorce File. He flipped through it, page by page, like a man skimming for a scent, a memory in dust. Page 4. The divorce petition, date, grounds, contents. Then the signature, signed Elliot Grant. He stared at it. The handwriting was familiar, but it wasn't his. The G lacked the usual decisiveness, and the slant he always maintained in his signature just wasn't there. It was a good imitation, convincing even, but it couldn't fool the real owner. He pulled out his phone and dialed Avery Chohe's personal attorney, who had worked with him for over 10 years. "Avery, do you still have the digital copy of my divorce file?" "Of course. It's in our internal archive. What's going on?" "Send it to me. Include the original scanned version with the signature." Avery hesitated. "I remember that file clearly, Elliot. We had it cross-checked and notarized. Everything was above board. You signed it on June 8th, right? Number, I never put my pen on that paper that day. Send me the copy, now." He hung up. While waiting, he opened his laptop and logged into an old email account one he hadn't touched in over 10 years. It was the inbox he used to exchange messages with Lena before everything fell apart. The password was the same, untouched. In the folder marked Family, only 5 emails remained. He opened the first one. It was a photo of Lucas at age 2, grinning from ear to ear in the kitchen. Behind him was Lena, her hair a mess, flour on her shirt, her smile faint but real. He zoomed in, focused on Lucas's left hand. There was a small birthmark on his wrist. Elliot sat still for a moment. His hand rested on the screen, right over the mark. Last night, the little boy at the diner had the same birthmark. He no longer had doubts. He was certain. Ping. Avery's email arrived. Attached, the PDF of the divorce file. Elliot opened it immediately. The last page, the signature line. Again, not his signature. Close, but not his. He grabbed his wallet, pulled out his driver's license, and compared the signatures. The difference was clear. He couldn't sit still anymore. He threw on his jacket, grabbed his car keys. The Livingston County Civil Records Building sat at the end of a red gravel road 10 miles out from town. The old facility had frosted glass doors and the warmth of an old train station waiting room. Portraits of past county clerks lined the walls. Behind a wooden counter, a silver-haired man in a wool shirt and vest sat at a desk. A plastic nameplate read, Mark Reyes. I need to see the divorce records for Elliot and Lena Grant. The official archive copy. Is that possible? Mark looked up, his gaze a touch wary. Purpose? I'm a party to the record. Mark gave a small nod. He opened a wooden drawer and began searching. A few minutes later, he placed a thin file on the desk. Elliot didn't rush. He opened it, turned the pages carefully, reached the section with the signatures, then laid his own copy next to the archived one. First discrepancy. The signatures didn't match. Second, the notary serial number was overprinted, not original ink. Third, the red circular stamp lacked a record ID number legally required. Elliot looked at Mark. Do you still have the original filing declaration? Mark furrowed his brow, slowly opened another drawer, pulled out a yellowed sheet of paper. At the top, name of first filer, Graham Grant. His brother. Not Elliot. Not Lena. Someone with no legal right to sign on their behalf. Elliot closed the file and stood. I'll need a full copy of this. Whatever the cost, I'll pay. Mark hesitated, then nodded. I've never seen a record like this before, honestly. It looks off. Elliot didn't answer. He took the papers and walked out. Outside, the snow was falling harder. But this time, Elliot didn't feel the cold. The confusion inside him was gone. What replaced it was suspicion growing into anger. A quiet, steady kind of anger. The kind that rises when a man realizes he's been manipulated by the very people he once trusted. And he knew. This was only the beginning. The red seal on the paperwork kept Elliot awake. All night, he sat alone at the small wooden desk in his hotel room, flipping through the copies of documents Mark Reyes had given him. Beyond the incorrect signature and the odd dates, one detail stood out to him. A temporary residence declaration attached to a utility bill. Required by the county office at the time, Lena's guardianship file was under review. The bill was under someone else's name, Carol Mendez. The address was in a small town down south, about a 2-hour drive away. Elliot checked the map. A place nearly erased from modern maps. Barlow Point. He had never heard of it, but with what little he had, it was the only lead. The next morning, the snow had let up. The sky was a dull grey. Elliot gathered the documents, got in his car, and headed straight south. Barlow Point appeared like an old slab of stone, quiet, weather-worn, and unwelcoming. Small wooden houses, dry winter lawns, no shop signs, no gas station. He stopped in front of a faded blue house, matching the address on the old bill. The wooden fence was crooked, though recently patched. Windows were shut tight, thin white curtains drawn. In his hand was a document envelope, copies of the bill, an old photo of Lena, and his business card. He knocked 3 times. Silence. Elliot stepped back slightly to avoid seeming too forward. Just then, the door swung open. A woman stood inside, grey hair pulled neatly back, wearing a thick sweater, a dish towel in her hand. She looked him over from head to toe without saying a word. I'm Elliot Grant. Sorry to bother you. I'm looking for someone named Lena Grant. Her expression changed the moment she heard the name. Not fear, exactly, but tension pulled tight across her face. Her hand clenched the towel. I don't know anyone by that name. You've got the wrong place. You're Carol Mendez, aren't you? She didn't answer. Elliot slowly pulled a photograph from the envelope, a picture of Lena and Lucas, cut from a larger, faded print. He held it out in front of her. "This is my ex-wife, and this is my son, Lucas. They've been gone from my life for over 10 years. But I believe you knew them. I believe they lived at this address. I'm not here to blame anyone. I just want the truth." She looked at the photo. Her eyes stopped on the child. A moment of silence. Then she turned and walked inside without saying another word. Elliot wasn't sure whether to follow or wait, but a few seconds later, she called out from inside, "Come in, but close the door behind you. There's a draft." The house inside was simple but clean. The scent of mint and pine oil hung in the air. On the bookshelf were a few medical and history books, along with some old photo frames. No pictures of children. Carol poured hot tea and set the cups on the table. She sat down in the chair across from him and leaned back. Lena didn't die. But for a time, she thought she had. Not because of an accident or illness, but because she'd been broken. Elliot didn't interrupt. Carol let out a sigh. "I'm a nurse. I worked at the county psychiatric care center back then. Lena was brought in bad shape, but not because she was sick, because someone wanted her to be seen as sick." That sentence was like a bolt sliding open on a locked door. "When did you meet her?" Elliot asked. "August, 10 years ago. She was admitted by a man. He said he was her husband. Graham Grant. Court papers, proper signatures, official red stamp. But when I looked into her eyes, I knew something was wrong." Carol's gaze shifted from her tea. She wasn't delusional. She wasn't agitated, just scared. Like someone being hunted. Elliot felt a chill run down his spine, though the room was fairly warm. "You believe Lena was forced into it?" "I'm certain, but back then, I couldn't do a thing. We were just medical staff. They came with the paperwork, the signatures, test results, all looked legitimate. She told me one thing, just once when I was changing the bandage on her hand. If he finds out, he won't believe me. He was me. Yes, Lena thought you were siding with your family. Because when she cried for help, the first to turn her away was your cousin Graham." Elliot leaned back in his chair. Every word she said was a cut across old memory. "After that, what happened?" Carol was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I helped her escape. I know it was against the rules, but if I hadn't, she would have disappeared for real. I used my name to rent a temporary place, hid her and the baby there for a week. Then they left. I don't know where they went." Elliot clenched his fists. He thought about all the unanswered calls, the letters returned, stamped, "Addressee unknown." "I'm sorry I didn't believe her," he said. Carol looked at him for the first time with a softer gaze. "It wasn't your fault. She never hated you. She was just afraid your silence would be the thing that killed her." The room fell quiet after Carol's words. The kind of silence that didn't just fill the space, it seemed to press down on it. Even the ticking clock on the wall hesitated. Elliot leaned gently against the back of the chair, as though his body had suddenly remembered the weight of everything he'd carried. His throat burned, not from illness, not from emotion exactly, but like the dry heat that lingers after walking through a smoke-filled room. It felt like he'd stepped into a dream where nothing was quite right, and no one had warned him he was dreaming. His eyes dropped to the floor, but his mind had already slipped backward, 10 years in a blink. He saw the apartment in D.C., the quiet tension that had settled into the walls long before she was gone. And then, those nights, coming home from work, hands full of takeout or groceries, key turning in the lock and that instant knowing. No sound of Lena humming in the kitchen, no scent of garlic or rosemary in the air, no small thud of Lucas's feet against the hallway floor as he came running, arms outstretched, squealing, "Daddy!" Just the stillness, just the cold. He remembered the way his voice sounded in those empty rooms too, loud, too desperate, calling her name even when he already knew she wasn't there. The voicemail messages that went unanswered, the carefully chosen words that never got a reply. Later, in that cramped attic apartment in New York, where the pipes clanged and the wind slipped through the window cracks, he had lain awake at night, staring at the ceiling, repeating the words like a mantra, over and over. She left because it was her choice, as if saying it enough times would turn it into something that hurt less. But no one chooses to be erased from the world like that. Was she afraid of me? Elliot asked. Carol shook her head slowly. Number. But she believed you wouldn't believe her, and that hurt more than fear ever could. Elliot tightened his grip. His voice dropped low, steadying himself. What about Graham? Did he ever come looking for her? Not directly, but some people did ask. A man in a suit and a blonde woman. They didn't give their names. Came just once after Lena left. I lied and told them she'd crossed into Canada. They never came back. Elliot locked it in his memory. Blonde hair. It could have been Graham's personal assistant back then, Candace, the one who always claimed to know nothing about private matters. He pulled a business card from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. This is my number. If you remember anything, any detail at all, please call me. Carol nodded and took the card. As Elliot rose to leave, she added, her voice gravelly, if you see her again, don't make her apologize. Elliot paused for a moment, then gave a slight bow, not as a promise, but as a quiet acceptance. Elliot followed the trail of a crumpled slip of paper tucked inside the old housing assistance application file Lena had once used, a small file he'd found in the local archive library, thanks to a tip from the girl at the bookstore. On the last page, there was a handwritten note, the purple ink smudged by water. Fiona Lang, confirmed that Lena is caring for her son, freelance artist. Café the Yellow House, Wexler, small artsy town, known for its community of independent painters and weekend student performances. Elliot had never been there. But the name Fiona Lang brought back Carol's final words. Lena's still alive, but she lives like no one's supposed to know she exists. Wexler was nearly a 2-hour drive from Barlow Point, winding through low hills and bare-branched woods. Elliot arrived in the afternoon. The sky was overcast, the light dull and heavy, like it carried the weight of memories still lingering somewhere among the unopened shops and narrow streets. The Yellow House Cafe sat at the end of the main road brown tile roof. Yellow wooden frames, wind chimes swaying, and a chalkboard sign out front. Student guitar performance, 5 p.m., free admission. Elliot pulled to the curb and stepped into a warm space filled with the scent of baked goods, coffee, and hushed voices. He chose a seat tucked in the back, still clutching the file envelope inside his coat. In his mind, he wasn't sure who he hoped to see, Lena or Lucas. And then the guitar began. Lucas sat center stage, black t-shirt, jeans, hair brushing his neck. He tuned his strings, head slightly bowed. There was no need for an introduction. Elliot knew it was Lucas. Not by the face, but by the gestures, the way he dipped his head in concentration, the way his left shoulder lifted when he cradled the guitar exactly how Elliot had been at 20. He began to play. No glance at the crowd, no search for reassurance, just the sound of strings raw, warm, a little hesitant at first, then finding steady rhythm. The song was original, simple lyrics, a refrain that echoed, "A road with no name, a hill with no home, you asked me. Is someone waiting at the end of winter?" A few audience members bowed their heads gently in time with the music. Elliot couldn't take his eyes off his son. Inside him, a strange feeling rose, part pride, part acheus, if he were watching a stranger walk away, carrying a piece of his own heart. The boy finished the song without fanfare, no bow, just set the guitar down and exited the stage through a side door. Elliot stood up and quickly made his way out through the back of the cafe. Outside, the alley was cold. Lucas was walking toward the end of the building row. Elliot called out, "Lucas!" He stopped, turned. For a brief moment their eyes met. There was no surprise, only recognition. Lucas spoke first, his voice steady, neither raised nor low. "I know who you are." Elliot slowed down, his voice trembling. "Son, I didn't know what had—" "Don't go near my mother again." A simple sentence, no anger, but sharp as ice. Lucas held his gaze for exactly 3 more seconds, then turned away. His steps weren't hurried, but they were firm. He didn't look back. Elliot stood, frozen. His heart didn't break, it just fell slack, like a snapped string, silent. He walked back toward the cafe, but didn't go in. He leaned against the doorway, trying to catch his breath. Elliot had just started to turn away from the cafe door when a soft female voice spoke behind him. "You're Elliot Grant, aren't you?" He turned around. A middle-aged woman with deep red hair, wearing a green wool coat, holding a notebook. Her face wasn't unfamiliar, but her eyes were cautious. "I'm Fiona Lang, manager of this place. I saw you once, on the news a few years back, giving some kind of talk. But honestly, I recognized you from a photo Lena still keeps." Elliot froze, then gave a slow nod. "You knew her?" Fiona glanced around, then stepped in a little closer, her voice quieter. "I did. Not well, but I hired her to illustrate a few posters for the town. She kept to herself, kind, never caused trouble. Folks here respected that." Elliot hesitated a moment. "Do you know where she's living now?" Fiona looked up, straight into his eyes. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it was unmistakably firm. "I do. But if you're here to ask her why she left, then you're about 10 years too late." Elliot swallowed hard, his gaze dropping. "I'm not here to accuse her. I just want to understand." Fiona's tone softened slightly. "Lena still lives in town, still painting, raising Lucas on her own. Nobody bothers them, and if you're truly looking to do something right, don't make her feel like she's been found again." She paused for a few seconds, then gently placed a small slip of paper in his hand, an address for a small gallery on the edge of town. "She doesn't need to hide anymore, but she still needs peace." After saying that, she turned and went inside. Elliot stood there for a few more minutes. On the sidewalk, the program flyers kept drifting just above the ground. One of them had a picture of Lucas holding his guitar, his face tilted toward the light distant, still and full of silence. He picked up the flyer, folded it in half, and slipped it into his pocket. That night, Elliot didn't go back to the hotel. He sat in his car, parked at the edge of the woods just outside town, where he could see the quiet green roof of the house where Lena and Lucas were living. He didn't go in, didn't call, just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, his forehead resting lightly against the window. Inside the car, everything was still. Like between him and his son right now, there was only silence. Elliot pulled over on the dirt road at the edge of Wexler town. The afternoon was fading. Wind slipped past the silent, low-roofed houses, rustling through a line of bare maple trees. The house in front of him was plain, weathered grey-white brick, peeling paint in patches. A corrugated metal awning hung above the door, where an old wooden chair sat alongside a few pots of dried flowers. There was no doorbell, just a small wooden sign hanging crooked beside the window frame, painted with a sparrow perched on barbed wire. Elliot stood still for a moment. His hand tightened slightly around the folder inside his coat, the folder he had carried all this way. Forged file copies, altered documents, faked signatures. And at the very back, an old photo of Lena and Lucas, taken in the kitchen, the sunlight blurring her gaze, but still clear enough to make his chest ache every time he saw it. He drew a deep breath, knocked 3 times. No answer. He stepped closer, pressed his ear to the door. From inside, faintly, he could hear music, classical, tinged with jazz and the soft rasp of a brush on canvas. He knocked again. This time, footsteps approached slowly, followed by the light sound of a latch being lifted. The door cracked open. Lena stood there. The light behind her spilled outward, catching half her face. Her hair was tied back hastily, with a few loose strands brushing her cheek. She wore an old sweater, her hand stained with pale blue paint. There were shadows under her eyes, and she wore no makeup. But what stunned Elliot wasn't how much she had changed, it was the utter quiet in her eyes. No shock, no fear, no happiness, just exhaustion. "I figured you'd show up eventually," Lena said softly. "You knew?" "Lucas told me, after the show." He couldn't hide it in his eyes. Elliot swallowed hard. He wasn't used to this kind of distance, the distance of someone who used to be a wife, now standing like a half-closed door. "I don't know what happened, I swear. I never agreed to anything. I never signed anything." Lena looked at him for a few seconds, then stepped back half a step, but didn't open the door any wider. "You were gone for 2 months, and when you came back, I had vanished, and for 10 years, not a word from you. No sign you were looking. I used to think you were complicit, or worse, indifferent." Elliot shook his head and took a cautious step forward. "I called. I wrote. But everything came back. No replies. I was cut off. So was I." Lena gave a faint smile, without a trace of mockery. "Someone forged my signature. The diagnosis postpartum psychosis was signed by Graham's hand. Every step I took was watched. Every word I said was questioned. Your cousin turned my life into a trap." Elliot bit his lip, then held out a stack of papers. "I found these. Not to prove anything. Just to start again." Lena didn't reach for them. She glanced at them briefly, then quietly shook her head. "They won't lift anything off my shoulders, because what I lost wasn't just a signature, it was time, trust, a whole life that was stolen from me." Elliot's throat tightened. His eyes drifted to the room behind Lena fabric-lined wooden walls, a large easel, and a painting still in progress. It was a white bird, trapped in a cage tangled with vines. He spoke, almost a whisper. "You still paint?" Lena gave a slight nod. "I can't stop. It's the only way I keep myself here." She stepped back a little, as if to close the door. Elliot understood the signal, but the words slipped out anyway. "Did you ever think, what if you tried calling me just one more time?" "I did. I thought about it. Then I stopped, because every time you didn't answer, a part of me died." Elliot bowed his head, his voice rough. "I'm sorry." A long silence. Finally, Lena exhaled. Her voice was gentler, but not soft. "I don't need your apology. I need you to understand. Things can't go back to the way they were. Lucas isn't the child you remember, and I'm no longer the woman who used to wait at the door every night you came home late." Elliot took a step back. "But I'm not giving up. I didn't come here to reclaim anyone. I came because I needed to know you're still alive, and how you've been living." Lena looked at him for a long time, then softly, barely more than a whisper, "I have lived, even if sometimes it was just to survive." She placed her hand on the edge of the door. Go. Today is enough. The door closed. No sound of a lock, but Elliot knew some doors don't need bolts. They're held shut by a past that's never been healed. He stood there a few more minutes, cold wind slipping down his collar. On the doorframe, a smear of green paint clung to the wood left by Lena's hand when she touched the door. Elliot reached out and brushed it lightly with his fingers, then turned, stepped down the porch. Didn't look back. Didn't need to, because from now on, the only thing that mattered was what lay ahead. Back in the city, Elliot didn't go straight home. He rented a small apartment on an upper floor of an old hotel in Midtown. From the balcony, he could see a row of bank towers, all lit up. Everything looked the same. Everything, except him. He knew this time. He wasn't just facing Graham, but an entire system that had once protected him, and also buried the woman he once loved. He rented a modest room at an old hotel near Chelsea, the same area where Lena used to have her art studio back when she was still in school. The room was silent. Almost no sound at all. Just the rustling of paper, the clacking of keys, and the steady turning of files that Avery Cho, his former personal attorney, had delivered after 2 days of digging. She sat across from him. Her face was sharper now, more angular, dressed in a plain suit, with her hair neatly pinned up. But her eyes hadn't changed, calm, deliberate, always watching everything with quiet precision. "I've suspected this for a long time," Avery said, unfolding a sheet of paper in front of Elliot. "But Graham is the direct heir, and he was authorized to represent the company while you were away. He used a temporary power of attorney to make everything look legal on paper. What about me? No one asked you. Graham claimed you were mentally unstable, in need of time away from family stress. They said you weren't in the right state of mind to handle a divorce." Elliot let out a low, bitter laugh. "So they made me out to be insane, just to strip me of my voice?" "Legally speaking, yes." Avery pulled a thicker document from her folder, Lena's guardianship authorization signed by Graham Grant. Elliot's name was nowhere on it. This request was approved unusually fast, less than a week. The reason given? Risk of reputational harm to the family due to wife's postpartum mental illness. Elliot slammed his hand on the table. "And who approved it?" "Judge Douglas Meyer. He's retired now." 2 days later, Elliot stood outside a lakeside apartment, the retirement home of Judge Meyer and his wife. The man who opened the door was thin, silver-haired, with a stern face. His eyes studied Elliot for a long moment. "I no longer have any authority. That matter was closed a long time ago. But it's not closed for my wife. Or my son." Meyer looked at him, his brow tightening slightly. "Elliot Grant, your brother was very persuasive, and your father, Henry Grant, was a man who didn't want scandal." Elliot froze. "So, you're admitting it?" "I'm admitting I was pressured. The petition was submitted by Graham. The medical records came from the family doctor. And there was a phone call. From Henry." Elliot sat still. His chest felt like ice. Meyer stood, walked over to the window. "You know why people are so easily manipulated in cases like this?" Elliot said nothing. "Because no one ever thinks their own family would do something like that." He turned around. His eyes no longer angry, just tired. "If Lena was still alive, I'd want to apologize. As for you, brace yourself. Because if you start digging into the people who want this buried, they won't just sit back and watch." That evening, Avery sent Elliot a sealed document, minutes from an emergency board meeting that year, while Elliot had been in Switzerland. Graham Granthis' cousin, the son of the eldest uncle, had taken over Elliot's role for 8 weeks. And in those 8 weeks, he did 2 things. Consolidated the company shares under his control, and erased Lena's name from every internal record. Elliot sat alone under the dim light, listening to Graham's voice echo from a recording of an internal meeting that Avery had secretly taped the year before. "We can't let an ordinary girl jeopardize the corporation. Lena is a liability. Elliot's blinded by love. If we don't separate them now, we won't get another chance." Another voice asked, "Are you sure Elliot won't find out?" Graham replied, "By the time he does, it'll be too late, and if I have to, I'll say, I only did what was best for him." Elliot closed the file. He stood up. For the first time, he didn't feel alone because the pain had turned into strength. And Graham was no longer just the man he once called a brother. He was the only thing standing between him and the freedom of the woman he loved. The wrought iron gate to the Grant estate swung open from a distance, as if Graham had known Elliot would come. The sky was a dull grey, mist hanging over the hillside. Elliot's Bentley crawled up the stone-paved drive toward the mansion, the place where he'd grown up, where he'd gotten married, and where he had last seen Lena cry on a summer night 10 years ago. When he stepped out of the car, no one was there to greet him. No butler, no staff. Just the front door left ajar, and the soft strains of a symphony drifting out from inside. Elliot entered the foyer. The high ceiling was still there, the crystal chandelier, the cold stone walls. But everything felt foreign now. In the middle of the living room stood Graham, pouring himself a drink. Light grey suit, slim tie, polished leather shoes. He looked up, as if welcoming an old friend. "Little brother, I figured you'd show up." Elliot didn't answer. He placed the folder on the glass table in front of Graham and took the seat across from him. "Read it, if you've still got a shred of shame." Graham raised his glass, took a sip, and didn't even glance at the folder. "You always were dramatic, always believed people had a conscience just waiting to be stirred." Elliot clenched his fists. "Forged signatures, faked medical records, guardianship papers signed without me present. It's all in there." Graham shrugged. "So? So you're going to court?" Graham sat down and set his glass of wine on the table. His eyes sparkled as if he were savoring an entertaining play. "Elliot, let me tell you something. Lena is a liability, not because she's a bad person, but because she doesn't fit. She doesn't belong with the Grant family. She doesn't belong with you. And most of all, she doesn't know her place." Elliot leaned forward, his voice sharp as a blade. "She used to love me. She used to believe you were a trustworthy cousin." Graham tilted his head slightly. "And she broke that trust when she threatened to sue me. Do you know she almost filed a complaint against me for emotional intimidation? She's too fragile to understand how this world works." Elliot shot to his feet. "She was terrified of being silenced, of being watched, of being confined. Because of you, Graham. Because of you." Graham let out a quiet chuckle. "You think the family doesn't know? They do, and they're on board, because you're the heir. If you fall, everything collapses. I'm preserving the Grant family's name. I did what needed to be done." Elliot paced, then stopped by the window and drew a deep breath. He turned back around, eyes red. "Lena is a human being, not some asset to be sacrificed for so-called reputation." "But you sacrificed her without even realizing it," Graham replied, as if delivering the final line of a story. "Because you were too busy with meetings, business trips, speeches. You left. I just cleaned up what you abandoned." Elliot raised a hand, almost lunging at him, but he stopped just inches before his fist would have landed. Graham didn't flinch. He just looked at him, lips curling into a faint smile. Elliot stepped back, picked up the folder, his voice low. "The next time we meet, it'll be in court." He turned and walked away. No more words. Graham didn't call after him. He simply lifted his wine glass and drained it in one long swallow. The door clicked shut behind Elliot. He walked through the gate, his stride firm as he made his way to the car. There was no more wind now, only rain starting softly, as though each drop was testing the ground. The first beads hit the windshield, stretching into pale, blurry streaks, like they were smearing out everything he'd just heard behind a cold grey veil. He opened the car door and slid into the seat. The interior light flicked on, casting a pale glow on the folder he still clutched tightly, pages full of printed lies, icy signatures, and a confession spoken without a trace of remorse. Outside, the rain grew heavier, but inside him, there was no room left for fear. The old flame, once love, once regret, once a silent ache now, burned in a different way, cold, deep, and steady. It didn't consume him. It lit the path ahead, a strength born from the only thing he still had left, the truth. And he swore. This time, he wouldn't let it be buried by silence, even if it meant standing against his own blood. Lena opened the door before Elliot had a chance to knock. She stood there holding a cup of hot tea, her face bare, no makeup, her eyes looking like she hadn't slept all night. She didn't ask why he had come. She wasn't surprised. "I knew you'd come back," she said, in an even tone neither sad nor glad. Elliot stepped up to the threshold, but didn't come inside. "I'm not here to apologize," he said, "and I'm not asking you to forgive me." Lena nodded, her hands still wrapped tightly around the cup. "Then why are you here?" Elliot took a deep breath, as if he'd been bracing for this moment a long time. "I'm here to ask you to speak up." The space between them seemed to drop an inch, like the air itself had shifted. Lena stepped back half a pace and leaned against the doorframe. Her face stayed still, but her hands trembled slightly. "You've kept silent for 10 years. But if you don't say something, Graham will keep going. Next time it might be someone else. And not everyone gets the chance to escape like you did." Lena turned her face away, as if trying to slip out of his gaze. "I don't know if I can. I'm not afraid of Graham. I'm afraid of the things I'll remember." A voice came from inside the house, low, steady. "If you can't do it, I will." Lucas stepped out from the shadows of the hallway and stood next to his mother. He wasn't tall, didn't speak like someone looking to make a scene, but his voice carried enough weight to quiet the room. "You once told me, staying silent in the face of wrong is a way of helping it along." Lucas looked straight at her, not crying, not shaking. "So today, you're going to show me what that really means." Lena looked at her son longer than she ever had before. All the dreams she once had of him growing up safe, free of hate, had come true. But now, that very reality was asking her not to step back. She set the teacup down on the small table by the window, turned, and opened the door wide in a gesture for Elliot to come in. "So, where do we begin?" Avery Cho's office was small, but bright. The late afternoon sun slanted through the large glass window, casting light across a desk cluttered with documents. "We'll need a statement from the witness and a complete chain of internal records," Avery said as she sat down in the chair across from Elliot. "If Lena agrees to come forward, I can file the case within a week." Elliot nodded. "I've reached out to Carol Mendez, the nurse who helped Lena escape. She's still holding on to some physical evidence. And Judge Meyer. He's on board. Sent over a letter of voluntary support this morning." Avery raised her eyebrows, slightly surprised. "So we've got 2 pillars to lean on." Elliot stood, pulled out his phone, and dialed the bank. "I'm transferring all my personal assets into a trust, separate from the family. If they try to retaliate, at least they won't be able to touch anything of mine." Avery didn't ask any more questions. She knew he was ready. A few days later, Lena arrived at Avery's office with Lucas. She wore a long beige coat, no makeup, and held a thin folder in her arm sketches she had drawn during the years on the run. She sat down, eyes fixed on Avery. "Read every line of the statement. I want to understand it fully before I sign." Her voice was clear, not loud, but solid as stone. Lucas sat beside her, his hand never leaving his mother's. Avery read through each section slowly. Elliot stood in the corner of the room, silent. When Avery reached the last page, Lena took the pen. She didn't look up, didn't hesitate. She signed. Avery closed the file. The room went still for a few seconds. Lucas squeezed his mother's hand. She smiled at him softly, like the first sunlight of spring, then turned to Elliot. "I'm not signing this to go back to the past. I'm signing so what happened to Minerva happens again." That night, Elliot stood by the window in his small rental apartment in Midtown. The city lights poured down like a river of gold, but for the first time, they didn't make him feel alone. He thought of Karolthi woman, who had kept silent for 10 years just to protect her mother, of Judge Meyer, who had once signed the wrong thing, but now chose to step forward, of Lucas the boy, who didn't blame his father, only chose to protect his mother, and of Lena the woman, who had walked out from the shadows of her own past. They weren't wealthy, they held no power, but they had done something few ever dared. They raised their hands for the truth. Elliot closed his eyes, listening to the distant sound of traffic rising from below. He knew the battle hadn't even begun, but this time he wouldn't be walking into it alone. Montana State Court, a late autumn morning. A cold wind swept across the stone steps leading up to the county criminal courthouse. Outside, the media had been gathered since early morning. Cameras, long lenses, and questions sharp enough to cut into anyone who dared step through the dark wooden doors. The door swung open. Graham Grant emerged, wearing a charcoal trench coat, followed closely by 3 attorneys carrying leather briefcases and wearing expressions like ice. He gave a slight smile to the Camarasa smile, belonging to someone long accustomed to standing on the right side of the world. Across the lobby, Lena walked in with Avery. No bodyguards, no media entourage. Just Lucas holding her hand and Elliot a step behind. She wore a pale blue dress, a thick coat hiding the faint tremble in her shoulders. But her eyes, neither lowered nor evasive, held steady. A reporter thrust a microphone forward. "Ms. Lena, after 10 years of silence, do you believe you're going to win?" Lena stopped, looked directly at him. "Today isn't about me. It's about what should have come to light a long time ago." That morning, the courtroom was packed, not just with reporters and journalists, but law students, women's rights organizations, even a few discreetly seated members from the Grant Group's board of directors. On the defendant's bench, Graham Grant sat as if chairing a board meeting, not facing a trial. Impeccably dressed in a dark suit and tie, one leg crossed neatly over the other, his eyes scanned the courtroom like he was studying which chess piece would move first. Behind him sat his 3 attorneys, each seasoned, sharply dressed, with eyes like blades. They whispered among themselves, passing thick folders back and forth, laptop screens glowing faintly beneath the courtroom lights. In stark contrast, Lena sat at the plaintiff's table. Her face was calm, though her hand clutched her son's tightly. Lucas sat close beside his mother, head lowered, but every time he felt her hand tremble slightly, he squeezed it a little tighter. Elliot sat a row behind them, silent. But his eyes never left the witness stand. Avery was the first to rise, her voice steady, even not raised, but each word landed like a nail driven cleanly into the air. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we will prove that the honor of a powerful family was used as a smokescreen to conceal acts of legal coercion. identity manipulation, and the unlawful confinement of a woman simply because she didn't fit their expectations. She presented a stack of documents, a copy of Lena's guardianship, contract missing a valid signature from Elliot, a medical record hastily signed by a doctor with no background in psychology, and most notably, a divorce petition filed without the plaintiff's verified presence. When Avery concluded her opening statement, Graham's lead attorney, Mr. Roland Dempsey, rose from his seat. "Your Honor, we object to this emotional rhetoric from the outset. My client is a businessman concerned with protecting the reputation of his corporation, and every procedure in question was executed legally under a valid power of attorney granted by his brother, Elliot Grant." Avery countered swiftly. Yes, there was a power of attorney, but it did not include the authority to place my client's wife under psychological guardianship without the husband's presence and without an independent medical diagnosis. The second attorneys. Helen cross-stood and began playing selected excerpts from past medical reports, piecing together a portrayal of Lena's supposed mental instability. She showed signs of postpartum depression, went 4 nights without sleep, and once wrote a suicide note, of which the family documented out of concern for her well-being. Lena froze. She had never written a suicide note. Lucas glanced at his mother, his face tightening. Avery stepped forward to the podium. "And do you see that letter here today? You don't because it doesn't exist. All we have is a faint photocopy of a handwritten note, completely unverified, and most importantly, there is no clause in this state's law that allows a man, simply because he's a relative, to commit a woman to an institution out of vague concerns about family image." The third attorney, Mr. Nathan Cole, delivered the final blow. If Lena was truly coerced, why didn't she speak up for 10 years? Why didn't she file a suit the moment she left the facility? The courtroom held its breath. Lena rose. "Because at the time, I had a 3-year-old who needed protection. I was being watched. I lived under a false name. And I was threatened. If I spoke out, my child would be taken away. And I stayed silent until today." Avery immediately called the witness, Mrs. Carol Mendez, the nurse who had helped Lena escape the facility. Carol brought with her a stack of old, yellowed paper records, among them a hand-drawn sketch by Lucas and a blood-stained piece of cloth from the time Lena had tried to fake a wrist injury to be transferred out of the isolation ward. Next came Judge Douglas Meyer, his face stern and resolute. "I signed the papers because I was pressured by Henry Grant Graham's father, and I've regretted it every day since." At that moment, Avery played a recording Graham speaking at an internal shareholders meeting. "If we don't get rid of Lena soon, Elliot will make her a co-owner, and we'll lose control of the corporation." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. The judge banged his gavel. Graham sat still, the corner of his mouth curling into a faint smile. "All for honor," he said, "and I'd do it all again if I had to." Avery stood, locking eyes with the jury. If honor is built on coercion, on someone else's blood, then it's no longer honor. It's a crime wearing a tailored suit. 3 hours later, the verdict was read. Ms. Lena Grant is officially exonerated. All prior psychological evaluations are hereby nullified. Mr. Graham Grant will face criminal prosecution for falsifying legal records, witness tampering, and human rights violations. Graham stood, silent. The smile was gone. Lena stepped down from the stand, walking past the stairs and the cameras. Reporters swarmed in. One asked, "Do you have anything to say?" Lena stood tall. A breeze caught her hair, gently sweeping it to one side. For the first time in 10 years, her voice rang out steady. "I'm not asking for justice for myself. I'm asking for it for the women who will come after me." She turned, still holding her son's hand. Behind her, Elliot smiled quietly. A new chapter had begun. Not for the powerful, but for those who had once been forced into silence. The late autumn sunlight streamed through the large glass window of a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of northern Helena. Dappled golden light danced across the dark wood floor, slipping between the edges of dry maple leaves taped along the window frame, a gentle farewell to the passing season. Elliot sat at the table near the window, his coat neatly draped over the chair, hands cradling a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Across from him sat Lena and Lucas. No one was in a hurry. No one rushed to speak. Lena slowly stirred her tea, eyes following the soft curl of steam. Lucas was smiling as he spoke about how he'd just been awarded a scholarship from an art academy. The piece he performed on opening night, Redemption, had gone viral, reaching audiences all the way across state lines. Elliot listened without interrupting, just smiled. "That night," Lena said, her voice steady but slow, "I thought I'd never be able to draw another line." She looked up at him. But then, Lucas put his guitar in my lap and said, "Keep drawing if Mum's still breathing." Elliot gave a soft laugh. A perfect reminder. She nodded. And I did draw, a painting I never imagined I could finish, not in 10 years. Lena's first exhibition in a decade was titled To Be Seen. In the main room, hanging at the center, was her largest piece, a phoenix, ablaze, soaring upward from a rusted cage. Below it, handwritten in small, careful script, "Don't judge the quiet ones, they might be lighting fires within." Lucas played the song he had written for his mother at the opening. No long introduction, he simply sat down, plugged in his guitar, and began to play the first chords. Redemption. The room fell silent for more than 4 minutes. When it ended, no one clapped, not because they weren't moved, but because no one wanted to break the moment. That day, Lena stood quietly beside the painting. She wore a plain cotton dress, no jewelry. Elliot arrived later and kept his distance. He didn't try to insert himself. Now, in the cafe, she looked at him, without the guarded, suspicious eyes she used to have in the beginning. "I don't know if I can forgive," Lena said, "but I know I don't hate you anymore." Elliot nodded. His voice was soft, with no expectations. "I'm not asking to come back, not asking you to rewrite anything in your memory. I just wanted to say, I'm still here, if you ever need." Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, she smiled. "I know. Thank you for being late, but still on time." Lucas gave a faint smile, stood up, and pulled out the chair for his mother. He was nearly as tall as Elliot Know, with shoulders squared, his gaze calm beyond his years. For a brief moment, Lena hesitated. Then she reached out and took her son's hand. Elliot stood as well, saying nothing, but for the first time, he extended his hand first. Lucas took it, not tightly, not in a rush, but genuinely. The three of them walked out of the cafe, sunlight falling across their shoulders, stretching long down the quiet street. No one spoke of the future. No one mentioned the trial. No one used the old titles. Just three people walking together down a new road, imperfect, but real. There are wounds no one can see, and there are silent battles that last a lifetime. But sometimes all it takes is one person, just one, to stand up, and hope, once thought lost, begins to flicker again. The story of Lena, Elliot, and Lucas is not a fairy tale. There's no magic in it, only truth. At times harsh, but always necessary to speak. And when the truth is spoken, it becomes strength. What do you think of Lena's decision? If you were in her place, would you have the courage to speak up? And Lucas, a boy, who chose to stand in the silence and side with his mother, doze, he remind you of someone in your life? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Don't hesitate to leave a comment, not just for me to read, but so others know they're not alone. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched you, share it with someone who might need a little light. And if today has been a dry, weary day, don't forget to put on a hydrating mask before bed, not just to soothe your skin after a long day, but as a small way to show yourself a little love. There are still so many stories to tell, and I'll be right here waiting for you.